Hello everyone, this is my narrated PowerPoint for the class MGD 348 Negotiation in Business. My name is Tihan and today I am going to talk how we can do the negotiation in the construction project management field. So it is very important to understand the nature of negotiation and how construction industry works, and it will give us an advantage in the competition. Today's presentation is divided into three parts. First, we'll take a look at negotiation in the business world. Second, we'll take a look at what is construction management. And last, we will study how we do the negotiation in construction industry. First of all, negotiation in the business. Dr. Chester Carrot said, in business as in life, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. So it is very important that you need to understand the strategies and plannings of the negotiation. So regarding the negotiation in business world, we will take a look at the four essentials of negotiation. The very first one is distributive bargaining, and then we'll take a look at integrative negotiation, and then we will study what are the strategies and planning of negotiation. And lastly, we will study other important factors such as ethics, culture, relationships, and power. Distributed bargaining. Lewicki, Berry, and Saunders mentioned three kinds of distributed bargaining: competitive, cooperative, and collaborative. They also categorize two of them as traditional approaches and one as a modernized approach. So the competitive and cooperative bargaining are a kind of traditional approaches in their perspectives. When we talk about these three approaches, we need to consider the four characteristics that govern the approaches. These are the assumptions, motivation, approaches, and the tactics. This is the four-step process of the distributed negotiation. It starts with an introductory, then informational, bargaining, and it ends with a closing phase. In the introductory phase, it usually starts with our purpose. So we start with our agenda, schedule, timing, and frame. And we also set the ground rules for the participants. And in the informational phase, this is a phase that each party have to exchange their information. And so both sides can explain their rationale. They can define their bargaining range. The bargaining phase. In that phase, we do our serious business. The purpose is to narrow our bargaining range. And at the same time, each party, they try to have an opportunity to anchor their targeted range. So this is the final phase, closing. In that phase, we set our deal, and it's all done. Warren Buffett said, "You are not dropped. That's because the other party was smarter than you during negotiations." So that means if you know the tools and techniques of the negotiation, you can still outsmart the other parties. Integrative negotiation. It is finding a solution that is acceptable to both sides. Lewicki, Berry, and Saunders mentioned four steps of integrative negotiation. First, identify and define the problem. So in these steps, what they advise is separate the people from the problem. And the second step is surface interests and needs. So you need to focus on defining interests and needs in these steps. Maybe your position as well. And then generate alternative solutions. And then we move on to the last steps, evaluate and select alternatives. So by using our goals and objectives as the standards, we can evaluate and select from our alternatives for our negotiation. The final goal of the integrative negotiation is to make the resultant pie bigger than the initial one. Howard Baker said, "The most difficult thing in any negotiation almost is making sure that you strip it off the emotion and deal with the facts." That's the point. You need to separate people from the problem. With effective planning and goal setting, most negotiators can achieve their objectives. Without them, results occur it's more by chance than by negotiator effort. Louis Berry and Saunders discussed the relationship between goals, strategies, and planning. So it starts with defining the negotiator's goals and objectives, then move on to developing a strategy to address the issues and achieve one's goals. Finally, we address the typical stages and phases of an evolving negotiation and how different issues and goals will affect the planning process. At the same time, we need to understand the difference between wishes and goals. Goals are forecasts that drives the negotiation strategy. And we also need to understand the difference between strategy and tactics. So there are 4 strategies: avoidance, accommodation, competition, and collaboration, which I will discuss in detail in the next slides. And then the planning. This is the most critical important activity in the negotiation, as suggested by the Louis Berry and Saunders. This is the detailed slide of the planning strategies. And there are 4 options that you can choose. First is accommodation, second avoidance, third collaboration, and the 4th is the competition. So if you are not sure which one to use, there is a guideline. Let's take a look at the option 1, accommodation. It is best used when relationship is higher importance and text is lower importance. The example situation may be like your boss requests maybe a report that you have to submit by tomorrow. And in that situation, the text is low concern and the relationship to your boss is more important. So what the strategy and approach that you have to choose is accommodation. And second option is avoidance. This is best used when we want to retreat or withdraw because the relationships and the text both are low concern. So you can choose these strategies. Or for example, if we look at the collaboration strategy, this is a kind of integrative strategies. It is best used when both text and relationships are high importance. So it's like you are dealing with your client. So you have the text is also important for the client and the relationship with the client also important. In this kind of situation, the strategy and the approach that you have to use is a collaboration strategy. And the last one is a competition. So it is best used when the text concern is high and the relationship is lower concern. Anyway, it is a win-lose approach in the negotiation. Now we understand the goals and strategies of the negotiation. So let's move to the planning process. So this is the steps that we implement our strategies. In these steps, we need to define the negotiation goals. We need to define the major issues related to achieving the goals. And at the same time, we need to assemble these issues and ranking their importance. And we have to define the bargaining mix. Then we have to define the interest. And we also need to know the alternatives. We also need to know our limits, including the resistance point. At the same time, we need to analyze and understand the other parties' goals, issues, and resistance points. And you have to set your own target and opening bids. This is the planning process. These are the important factors that we need to consider for the negotiations as well. Ethics. So when we do a negotiation, we have to decide whether we want to be an ethical negotiator or a non-ethical one. And perception, connection, and emotion. We have to consider all these factors. As I have discussed in the previous slides, we have to separate the people from the problems. Even though we need to separate, but we still need to consider our emotion to a considerable amount. And communication, it is very important for us to choose the appropriate communication media to address our negotiation. And relationships and power, we have to maintain a good relationship with the other parties that we are doing the negotiation, and we have to understand the power differences, and especially if we are doing the international negotiation, we need to understand the cross-cultural issue. We have to understand each other. Sunny Mittal, he is the Indian entrepreneur and billionaire. He said, "For me, relationship is very important. I can lose money, but I cannot lose a relationship. The test is at the end of a conversation or a negotiation, both must smile." So relationship is very important. Construction project management. This is the second part of our presentation. So what is construction project management? In the project management fields, there are two types of project management, traditional and non-traditional, and the construction projects are considered as the projects managed by the traditional way. They are called traditional projects because the model that they use is called the waterfall model. As we see in the diagrams, like each phases of the construction projects have to finish before another phase is started. So project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. Project managers must not only strive to meet the specific scope, time, cost, and quality requirements of the projects, they must also facilitate the entire process to meet the needs and expectations of the people involved in or affected by the project activities. And there are 4 key elements in the framework of project management. First is the project management constraints, and project management knowledge areas, and project management process groups, and project stakeholders. And we'll take a look at these 4 elements in next slides. So, project management constraints. There are 6 typical project constraints as recommended by the SCOBLB. And triple constraints affect the project goals, and other constraints affect the ability to meet the goals. So scope, time, and costs are considered as the triple constraints of the projects. It is important that project manager must include negotiation through all these project constraints. These are the 10 project management knowledge areas: integration, scope, time, cost, quality, human resource, communication, risks, procurement, and stakeholder management. And you can see almost all these knowledge area is involved with the negotiation, like integration, human resource, communication, procurement. You have to negotiate with the supplier or vendor when you are doing the procurement. Since project management is application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques that I have mentioned in the previous slides, it's very important that in order to be an effective negotiations, the project manager must address all these knowledge areas. Then we'll take a look at the project management process groups. As per the PM Boot Guide, there are 5 phases in the project management process groups: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling and closing. In the initiation, we usually do the project charter and the kick-off meeting. In the planning, we plan for our detailed schedules, and we also plan for each knowledge areas. And the execution phase, we do the coordination with the people, and at the same time, we have to make sure that the client is satisfied with our deliverable. And monitoring and controlling process, it is a measuring progress, and it's also the negotiation is involved, and the closing. So this is a diagram that you can see. You can see the overall view of these process groups, and then you'll see that monitoring and controlling is involved in all these 4 processes. And that's why it is very important to bring these process groups into a consistent structured negotiation, and it can increase the chance of project success. Now let's take a look at the project stakeholders. It is important to address the needs and expectations of the stakeholders. Successful project managers enter effective negotiation and develop good relationship with project stakeholders to understand and meet their expectations. According to Scalwabi, there are 8 major types of project stakeholders: project sponsor, project manager, project team, support staff, supplier, client or customer, and government authority, governmental body, and the competitor or the opponent. So you need to consider all these stakeholders and have to do an effective negotiation with all these stakeholders if you want your project to be successful. Negotiation in construction industry. This is the last part of my presentation. And then in this section, I will talk about the 4 key issues: project managers' roles in negotiation, negotiation in construction project management, and win-win negotiation process, and checklists and best practices that we can adopt in the construction industry. So what are the roles of the project manager? Since he is the key person in a project, he is related to a lot of activities. First, he must develop personal power to do the negotiation, and he must be self-controlled. Self-control means he have to differentiate the problem and the emotion. Then he have to be inclusive. Inclusive means he have to include all the important stakeholders in the negotiation process. And he must be people-oriented. People-oriented means he have to deal different stakeholders differently. For example, like the customer, he have to deal the customer with the deliverables or other requirements that they need for the projects. And the government authority, they are different stakeholders. So that means the project manager have to be people-oriented when he do the negotiation. And then the consultative comms. Project manager should be a consultant for his project so that everyone will come and consult their issues, their problem, their conflict. And then the relationship building. Project manager have to build relationship with all key stakeholders. It is very important. And then network building and nurturing. This is also an important role of a project manager. And another one is conflict resolution. This is very important, that negotiation has to take part a lot in this conflict resolution role. So these are the important roles of the project manager, and the negotiation processes are involved in all these roles. So how can we do an effective negotiation in project management? First, we have to negotiate during our project life cycle. Project life cycle is the project processes that I have already discussed in the previous slide: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So we have to do negotiation in all these project phases. Then we have to analyze and negotiate with the stakeholders. And I've already talked about the stakeholder in the previous slides. It is very important that you have to do an effective negotiation with the stakeholders. And then you have to understand the power and politics of a project. And then you have to understand the project constraints. Project constraints are the scope, cost, and time, and etc. that I've already talked in the previous slide. And the last but not the least steps is the negotiating collaboratively. Because most of the construction projects involves a lot of stakeholders. So it is very important that the strategy that you have to adopt for the construction project, it's like the collaborative strategies. You cannot do a competitive, because most of the construction project, their objective is to build a long-term relationship with the clients and other stakeholders. So it's collaborative negotiation is very important, and this is the only strategy that we have to adopt in the construction project negotiation. Now let's take a look at the win-win negotiation process for the construction industry. So these are the recommended steps. And first we have to focus on common project goals. Then we have to establish rapport and relationships. Understand what motivates the stakeholders. Understand the win-win options. And practice. Before you do the negotiation, you have to practice. And emphasis on the consensus. Consensus is mean a kind of contract. And you have to highlight what are your criteria. You have to highlight what are your requirements. And then the next steps is confirmation of the agreement, and then analyze the outcome and risk, and then summarize and document what have been agreed. So it is a kind of circular process. So it's when you start a new project, you check your documents, and then you start your new project goals, and then it repeats again. Negotiation checklists, or maybe the best practices. Not every negotiation problem is the same, but there are some typical questions or problems that arise in negotiation, and what are priority problems, so that we can prepare and we can ask these questions before we do our negotiation. So the first one is the interest. So interest is we need to ask what are our interests and what are the interests of the other parties. And second one is the options. So we have to ask a question like, does the situation look as though someone must win or the other lose? Or is this a business or family situation? Or where maybe both parties have to gain or lose? Then we have to consider the alternatives. So am I certain about what I will do if negotiations end without agreement? And then I know what they will do if they don't make an agreement. That are the alternatives that I have to consider, that you have to consider when you do a negotiation. And another one is the legitimacy. So are there critics who are likely to go after one or both of us? So something like this. We have to consider the legitimacy. And then, am I concerned that I may get ripped off? Or am I treated unfairly? And then you have to consider about the communication. Do I know what I want to listen for? Or are the messages I want to deliver clear? So if your message is not clear, they will not understand your anchoring point, or they will not understand your interests. So your message have to be clear. And the relationship, is our working relationships likely to be difficult? Or will it be running smooth? Or might it be difficult for me to talk about money with them? Something like this. You have to consider the relationship matter. And the last is the commitment. So am I clear on the kind of commitment that I can realistically expect at the end of the negotiation? Or am I approaching the time to make a decision? So Yeah. So it's very important that you have to understand the nature of the commitment. Okay, that's all for today, and I would like to summarize my presentation. First, negotiation is essential in business, and knowing project management nature will give you an advantage in your negotiation processes. And preparation is the only way to a win-win negotiation. These are my references that I use for this research. And I would like to end my presentation with the words of the JFK. And he said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." Thank you.